In the early months of 1979, Jerry Falwell, Paul Weyrich, and Richard Vigee were among a small group of activists gathering to discuss plans to organize the growing number of political conservative Christians. They wanted to create a political organization combining the conservative party of the GOP and push the Republican Party to the right. During the breaks, the colleagues would often discuss their mutual interests. Jerry, Weyrich says, and I quote, "There is in America a moral majority that agrees about the basic issues, but they aren't organized, so they don't have a platform. So the media ignores them. Somebody's got to get that moral majority together." End quote. Falwell agrees. Often, Falwell would hold his I Love America rallies on the steps of the state capitol. In April 30th of 1979, he sent out a fundraising letter beginning, "My heart is burning within me today. It is about time that Christians here in America stand up and be counted for Jesus Christ. We are the moral majority, and we have been silent for long enough." Falwell knew his campaign to clean up America would be costly, but, quote, "If we do not accomplish this task, I am afraid that America will face the judgment of God." In June of 1979, the moral majority became a reality. "This is war," Falwell remembered. Falwell believed that to win the war against crime and immorality, to save the American family, to stop the killing of 1.5 million unborn every year, would take everyone willing to take a stand regardless of his or her race or religion, social class, or political party. The Moral Majority was set up as three distinct organizations: the Moral Majority Incorporated, a legislative body, the Moral Majority Foundation, an educational group, and the Moral Majority Political Action Committee. It was designed to represent a number of different churches like Catholics, Mormons, Jews, and Protestants. As abortions went to the forefront, it only took a matter of months to raise $1.5 million in startup funds. The launching of the Moral Majority by Falwell was at a time many socially conservative Americans were becoming increasingly concerned at the decline of morality. There was an increase in divorces, sexual behaviors, and the change in gender roles. Falwell blamed the changes in American family life on liberal government policies. When it came to the Equal Rights Amendment, Falwell said that the battle was against, quote, "a piece of anti-family legislation that feminists, unisexualists, secular humanists, and others had tried to foist on the American people in a satanic attempt to destroy the biblical concepts of the Christian home," end quote. Republican nominee Ronald Reagan attended a revival meeting in Dallas, Texas during the 1980 presidential campaign. He addressed a crowd of 15,000 Christians. Quote, "I know you can't endorse me," he began, "but I want you to know I endorse you and what you are doing." He had the moral majority backing. Should have said right. Republican presidential candidate Ronald Reagan spoke at Liberty Baptist College in Virginia 1 month before Election Day. Reagan advocated for, quote, "the restoration of classroom prayer in public schools." End quote. This is not the first time Reagan has spoken at a fundamentalist Christian college, but many analysts wondered if Reagan's commitment to the moral majority was genuine. Most did not think it would last. Falwell called Reagan's election, quote, "the greatest day for the cause of conservatism and American mortality in my adult life," end quote. The moral majority was credited for helping Reagan win, along with numerous other small conservative religious activists. Although Reagan did not meet all the expectations of the moral majority, Falwell remained a supporter, and when he ran again in 1984, the moral majority was there to help register millions of new voters, along with other religious rights groups. Not everybody agreed with the stance the moral majority took. On November 3, 1981, gay activist Scott Tucker and some friends, quote, "put on some fundamentalist drag and joined a Jerry Falwell rally in Philadelphia." They listened to Falwell speak for 2 hours against the feminists, the abortionists, and the homosexuals. It was then they stood up and produced cloth with protest slogans on them. This is a silent witness, Tucker says, and it was also good publicity for his cause. In 1983, Larry Flynt printed an ad parody of Jerry Falwell in his Hustler magazine. It was a parody of Falwell's first sexual encounter and it with his mother. This outraged Falwell, and he sued the magazine. While this is not an attack directly on the moral majority, it was an attack on its founder. In order to fund his lawsuit, Falwell sent letters to 500,000 members of the moral majority describing the ad parody, and he sent out 30,000 letters to major donors. With their contributions, the moral majority is showing their support, while Falwell loses the libel claim but wins for emotional distress. The Supreme Court overturns his win in 1988. While on the PTL show, Jerry Falwell promised that if 1,000 people would send in $1,000 each, he would go down the Heritage USA waterslide and take a friend with him. That friend was Doug Oldham, lead singer on the PTL show. September 10th, 1987, Falwell took the plunge down a 60-foot waterslide and fulfilled that promise. This stunt raised $1 million and was part of the $22 million raised. At the end of the slide, Falwell was talking to the Evening News. Quote, "Can you imagine the fun? Split screen, the distinguished Pope stepping off the plane from Rome in Miami, and this nut, this Baptist preacher, coming down the waterslide for $22 million. End quote. Falwell worked hard for the moral majority, and even though the religious right was able to secure a place in mainstream politics, that was not the case for the moral majority. In 1988, Vice President George H.W. Bush ran for president and was the party favorite. However, surprisingly, Pat Robertson, a religious broadcaster and evangelical political activist, was also in the run for the nomination. Matthew Sutton wrote, quote, "Pat Robertson's campaign in the Republican primaries split the religious right. Many grassroots activists supported him, while the leaders of the religious right were divided between Robertson and Bush." End quote. This undermined what unity that the moral majority had among the men and women that compromised it. This caused the organization to collapse in on itself and to officially disband in 1989. Jerry Falwell died May 15, 2007. He will be remembered as the member of the moral majority and for playing a, quote, lead role in finding a political movement, end quote. He was also able to bring religious leaders from different churches and faiths together to work toward common goals. Francis Fitzgerald writes, quote, "He introduced the fundamentalist senses of perpetual crisis and war between the forces of good and evil into national politics, where the rhetoric has remained ever since." Francis Fitzgerald writes, quote, "He introduced the fundamentalist senses of perpetual crisis and war between the forces of good and evil into national politics, where the rhetoric has remained ever since." End quote. The end of the moral majority gave way to a new organization, the Christian Coalition. Not everyone agreed or liked Jerry Falwell or the moral majority. They went hand in hand since Jerry founded the political group. Quote, "The Reverend Jerry Falwell died after collapsing in his office at Liberty University," end quote, Katie Couric discusses. "The founder of the moral majority left a lasting mark on the American political landscape." Jerry Falwell's legacy lives on through his son, Jerry Falwell Jr., who took over as the president of Liberty University after his father's death in 2007. Like his father, he endorses a president, but not for the same reasons. While his father endorsed Reagan for wanting to put back into America and make it a more moral nation, Falwell Jr. believes the government should be free of religious association and supports Trump. Falwell Jr. was asked a question, quote, "So the government you want is one free of religious association," end quote. His response was, quote, "Yes, the government should be led by someone who is going to do what's in the best interest for the government and its people. I believe that's what Jesus thought too," end quote.